There's been a resurgence of interest in inquiry-based approaches as a powerful means of fostering professional learning with the aim of improving educational outcomes for young people. At the University of Stirling, our model of critical collaborative professional inquiry is based on practice theories. In that, we build upon practices as knowing in practice. It's the knowing through doing. We're concerned with the social materiality of practice. In other words, that practice is not just about people, but it is about all of the things of practice as well. So the resources within classrooms and schools, the policies, the technologies, as well as the human component of practice. We also consider practice as both being embodied within the person. It's what we do and how we do that in relation to others. And indeed, we suggest that practices exist and emerge in historical and social contexts. So practices have a history which shapes what happens in future, and also are shaped by the context within which we do that practice. Practices are also emergent in that we cannot know in advance how practices through change will emerge in future. So we use this practice-based theory to influence the way that we think about professional learning, to shape the professional learning and the frameworks that support that professional learning in the workplace and through our formal educational institutions. So drawing on Hager, Lee and Reich's work, we speak about practice-based learning as learning in, through and from practice. I'm now going to speak about how that has informed our model of critical collaborative professional inquiry. So drawing upon two strands of research within Stirling, Mark Priestley's work in curriculum, my own work in professional learning, we have shaped a model which has conceptual and practice-based phases to take forward school-based curriculum development. The first conceptual phase, concerned with curriculum, looks at engaging with the policies and purposes of the curriculum, then engaging with practices such as practices of assessment, pedagogies and so on, and then engaging in a contextual analysis to decide what it is that we want to change within curriculum, which aspect of curriculum we're going to take forward. We then move to a conceptual practice-based phase, which is based on critical collaborative professional inquiry, and work through the rest of the programme in that phase. So the start of the programme looks at the conceptual, and then we work through in a practice, in a model that we've developed. So the model was developed at the University of Stirling. Since 2002, we've been working to hone the model. Basically, it starts with engaging critically with new ideas in research and participating in professional dialogue about people's own experiences and views and values, and then connecting scholarly ideas to their own aspect of practice, gathering data to and subject it to scrutiny. We then look at initiating collaborative action to change what is happening, to innovate, to make new practices, trial new approaches with colleagues. So professional inquiry can both be considered as an orientation to practice, so the inquiring professional, or as a collective and interactive process in working with others, or as a series of events or actions. And in this instance, when we speak about critical collaborative professional inquiry, we're speaking about both that collective notion and also a series of events and actions. The methodology of critical collaborative professional inquiry, which I'll now refer to as CCPE, is derived from action research, and therefore it's a methodology which draws on sets of different theories, including complexity theory. And that's very appropriate given that education is a complex practice. Collaborative inquiry is also distinguished from other forms of action research by the central role embedded in it of the development of others, which is a key aspect of the practice. In thinking about why we've named CCPE, I think it's important to look at those different wordings within the title. So first of all, the critical signals both the aspect of critical pedagogy linking to social justice and equity and fairness for young people, but also to the critical engagement of those engaging in CCPE with research and reading, academic research and reading. The notion of collaborative, as I've said before, is about the collective endeavour. So teachers, educators, head teachers, others within and beyond the school community working together. Although someone's likely to take a lead, it's certainly not a top-down process. In fact, it's more likely to be a bottom-up process. And indeed, that way promotes the professional learning of everyone within and developing leadership skills and so on. The notion of professional links very much to professional judgment. Professional judgment is a value judgment, and it's asking in whose interest is this endeavour, who benefits from this. And so we're asking people to make a professional judgment in taking forward something that will benefit all young people, not advantage the already advantaged, for example. We've used the term inquiry to distinguish from research in that professionals inquiring to their own practice are not objective bystanders, but rather are involved within the practice. And therefore they have a particular way of engaging with the people that they're working with, the young people and others across the school community when they're looking at an aspect of practice. That means that if, for example, things don't go as planned and perhaps are not going as you would wish, the professional would then stop the inquiry and go back to original practice and activities, whereas a researcher may stand outside and watch why things are happening in a more negative way. And that's not appropriate. So professionals have to make a judgment about what is educationally desirable. The process of critical collaborative professional inquiry has 3 stages: inquiring through focusing, inquiring through interrupting, and inquiring through sense-making. I'm now going to say a little bit about those 3 stages. So at the focusing stage, the group of professionals who've come together have got to engage in professional dialogue with themselves and others across the school community and wider to decide on the aspect of practice that they want to take forward through an inquiry. So what is their area of intrigue, concern or interest? And then they have to engage with policies, research and practices to see what's out there at the moment happening around that area and what new research is out there that will inform a different way of looking at this problem or concern or interest. It's important to consider the professional ethics within an inquiry. After all, we need to think about how we represent others as we disseminate the findings of our inquiry. So we need to think again about social justice and equity and fairness. Developing the focus of the inquiry is done through reading, research, current research and ideas to develop a conceptual framework which will guide the inquiry. And through that, we then iteratively develop the final question for the inquiry, which is an open question which usually asks how or in what ways. The conceptual framework is then used to guide a plan over a series of weeks or months, depending on the question that is being looked at. In the interrupting phase, and we speak about interrupting because this is a deliberate interruption to current practices, a new way of imagining practices, we then undertake the inquiry using the plan and looking back at the conceptual framework, sometimes modifying that framework through further reading and making any changes as required, and all the while engaging in systematic gathering of data, which we'll later use to evidence the outcomes. In the final phase, the sense-making phase, and yet to say these 3 phases are not necessarily sequential, because indeed some of that sense-making starts with the reading at the beginning of the process. But in the sense-making at the findings phase, you would critically analyse the data using the conceptual framework to generate evidence of impact. And that impact would be on young people, on the staff, colleagues and others who are involved in the inquiry, and also thinking about outcomes for the wider educational community as we disseminate our findings. Impact can be on changing practices or behaviours, developing knowledge and understanding, on technical or personal skills, or indeed developing attitudes and cultures. So we're also thinking about affective dimensions of our work. This links very directly into Successful Futures, where they're looking at building the capacity of all practitioners and leaders with an ability to reflect on and evaluate their own practice and design and create challenging and stimulating curriculum. It draws upon, or it aligns to rather, the national approach to professional learning, looking at pedagogy for professional learning, looking at schools as learning organisations and collaborative networks and so on. In schools as learning organisations, it explicitly asks that staff engage in forms of inquiry to investigate and extend their practice, and that inquiry is used to establish and maintain a rhythm of learning, change and innovation. And it's also very closely aligned to the new professional standards in Wales in 2018, where it's asking professionals to engage with wider reading and research, to develop professional networks and communities, and engage in highly effective, sustained professional practice. Taking responsibility for leading, innovating and developing new techniques. So I suggest that critical collaborative professional inquiry, the systematic model for professional learning from University of Stirling, is a really strong methodology for building the capacity of practitioners and leaders, including the ability to reflect on and evaluate their own practice, to design and create a relevant, challenging and stimulating curriculum as suggested by Successful Futures. It also is aligned to the national approach to professional learning in Wales, in thinking about pedagogy for professional learning, in thinking about schools as learning organisations, and indeed aligned to the professional standards. Schools as learning organisations suggests that staff should engage in forms of inquiry to investigate and extend their practice, and that the inquiry is used to establish and maintain a rhythm of learning, change and innovation. And professional inquiry is a really strong methodology for doing that. It also enables teachers to demonstrate professional actions and competences of the standards, in that it requires teachers to engage in wider reading and research, to engage with professional networks and communities and form those professional networks and communities through inquiry. And indeed, it's a highly effective way of sustaining professional learning because it's a sustainable model for professional learning. It also develops leadership practices as people are required to take responsibility for their own professional learning. It's a way of innovating practices through trialling new approaches in curriculum and indeed developing new techniques. And indeed, as Addysg suggests, they encourage schools to try something new or different and emphasise that they won't be penalised. So finally, critical collaborative professional inquiry as a professional learning methodology offers a really strong way of trialling new practices and different practices as promoted by Addysg, as a way of innovating in the new curriculum.